Nikola Tesla stood alone in the dark, and yet, he was the only thing anyone could see. It was January 1893. The hall had been completely blacked out, and for a brief moment, nothing existed but silence and expectation. Then, without warning, two glass spheres began to glow in his hands. There were no wires, no visible source of power. The light simply existed, sustained by Tesla himself. The reaction was immediate. People stepped back. Some turned their faces away. Others froze in place, trying to understand whether what they were witnessing was a demonstration or something that wasn't supposed to be happening at all. But Tesla didn't react. He didn't explain. He made no dramatic gesture. He simply stood there, motionless, holding the light as if it were trivial, as if electricity, that invisible force the world barely understood, was entirely under his control. And in a way it was, because Tesla wasn't performing a trick. He was revealing a possibility. In that moment, without almost anyone realizing it, he was already years ahead of everyone in that room, and perhaps decades ahead of his time. 1893 was not a stable year, and New York was far from a city moving smoothly toward progress. It was a place where the past and the future occupied the same physical space, almost in direct conflict. Electric streetlights were beginning to appear, but the smell of kerosene was still too recent to be forgotten. Horse-drawn streetcars moved through avenues where engineers debated how to transmit power across distances that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The world was changing, but not in a straight line, and Tesla wasn't following that change. He was forcing it. 9 years earlier, in 1884, he had arrived in the United States with almost nothing, 4 cents in his pocket, a letter of introduction to Thomas Edison, and a mind that operated in a way no one around him could truly follow. Tesla didn't sketch his inventions. He built them first inside his head, complete machines, entire systems, already in motion. He would test them mentally, correct flaws, refine details, as if he were working inside a laboratory that only he could see, and only then would he bring them into the physical world. To most people, that seemed like eccentricity. But in that darkened hall, in 1893, it was becoming clear that it was something else, something far beyond that. And whatever came next would not be small. What few people know is that in 1893, Tesla was living through a moment of quiet tension that rarely appears in the heroic versions of his story. He had just voluntarily surrendered the royalties he received from Westinghouse, a decision that, over the years, would mean giving up a fortune that today would be estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. He did it to save the company, to ensure that his alternating current motor would continue to be manufactured and distributed. Tesla understood that the fight was not about his wallet. It was about alternating current itself. And at that moment, the fight was far from over. The so-called war of currents was at its peak. On one side, Thomas Edison's company defended direct current, a system that worked well over short distances, but that required a power station every few city blocks to avoid losing strength. On the other, Westinghouse was betting on alternating current, which could travel hundreds of kilometers far more efficiently, but still faced fierce public resistance. And part of that resistance had been carefully manufactured. Engineers hired by Edison were publicly electrocuting animals, dogs, calves, and in one episode that shocked New York, even an elephant, using alternating current to demonstrate the danger of the technology. It was propaganda, and it was brutal. Tesla knew that. He also knew that the only possible answer was not a counterargument. It was a demonstration. The opportunity came in the form of the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, set to open its doors in May 1893. The city of Chicago had promised a fair that would be the greatest technological celebration in American history, a kind of declaration to the world that the United States was ready to lead the coming century. And there was a fierce competition for the fair's lighting contract. General Electric, which had absorbed much of Edison's legacy, submitted a bid. Westinghouse, carrying Tesla's technology, submitted another. The money at stake was enormous, but what was truly being decided was far greater than money. It was the narrative of electricity's future. Meanwhile, back in New York, the city was living through its own contradictions. 1893 was the year the financial panic swept across the United States, closing banks, collapsing businesses, throwing thousands of workers into unemployment. the streets Tesla walked every day. He covered 15 to 20 kilometers daily, invariably well-dressed, invariably alone, were the same streets where lines of unemployed men formed outside soup kitchens. The city that promised the future could not sustain its present, and Tesla, living in a rented room, working in a laboratory he had built on limited resources, was in the middle of all of it, invisible to most, but absolutely central to what was about to happen. There was also a matter that no one spoke aloud, but that every engineer of the era understood. The alternating current motor Tesla had patented in 1888 had not been invented in isolation. An Italian physicist named Galileo Ferraris had independently arrived at the same principle a year earlier and had chosen not to patent it. Tesla had no knowledge of Ferraris when he built his own motor. But history works this way, full of coincidences that time turns into disputes. What separated Tesla from Ferraris was not genius. It was the fact that Tesla sold the idea, insisted on it, brought it to scale in a way the Italian never attempted. Inventing something is one thing. Making the world adopt an invention is something else entirely, and Tesla was learning that the hardest possible way. In May 1893, the world's Columbian Exposition opened its doors, and Westinghouse had won the lighting contract. What visitors saw as they entered that complex of white pavilions built along the shores of Lake Michigan was not simply a fair. It was a rupture. 200,000 electric lamps illuminated the buildings, the walkways, the fountains. It was more artificial light concentrated in a single place than any human being had ever witnessed in the entire history of civilization. People wept, literally wept, standing still, staring at it. Because it was not just the beauty, it was what that light represented. It was proof that alternating current worked, that it was safe, that it was the way forward. And at the center of it all was Tesla, running demonstrations in his own pavilion. He passed electrical current through his own body to light lamps without wires. He generated artificial lightning with his coil that stretched several meters in length. He stood a copper egg upright using a rotating electromagnetic field, a direct reference to the famous episode attributed to Christopher Columbus, a nod to the fact that the fair celebrated 400 years since Europeans first arrived in the Americas. It was theater. It was science. It was both at once, and Tesla was the only living man who could do that with such unsettling ease. But what history tends to erase is the emotional cost of all of it. Tesla was 37 years old in 1893. He had worked himself to the physical limit for years. He slept, according to his own records, between 2 and 3 hours a night. He suffered from episodes that today we would recognize as severe anxiety attacks, flashes of light in his visual field, hypersensitivity to sounds and smells, dissociative episodes he described as feeling himself come apart at the seams. He was obsessed with the number 3, could not touch other people's hair, needed to calculate the volume of every dish before eating. These were rituals that anchored him to the world when everything inside him seemed on the verge of collapse. And there was something else, something that rarely appears in documentaries. Tesla was profoundly lonely. Not in the romantic way the narrative of the misunderstood genius tends to suggest, but lonely in a practical, concrete, daily way. He dined alone every day at the same restaurant, at the same hour, served by the same waiter, ordering the same dishes. He had no romantic partners, no close friends in the full sense of the word. He had admirers, correspondents, colleagues. But intimacy, the messy, imprecise intimacy that most people consider the foundation of a human life, that he never allowed. He said that women were superior to him in every way, and that he would need a lifetime to become worthy of one. It was an elegant way of keeping everyone at a distance. New York, in that year of 1893, was a city also living through a kind of collective loneliness. The financial panic had destroyed trust. The immigrants arriving in enormous waves, Italians, Eastern European Jews, Slavs, found a city that promised everything and delivered little. The tenements of the Lower East Side held population densities that rival the worst slums of the contemporary world. There were children who had never left their block, within a radius of a few hundred meters, because the city beyond was simply too hostile. And at the same time, Fifth Avenue displayed a wealth that was literally obscene. The mansions of magnates that made the European aristocracy look modest. Tesla moved between these two worlds without fully belonging to either. By the end of 1893, after the triumph in Chicago, Tesla returned to New York with something he had not possessed before: uncontested public legitimacy. Alternating current had won. Not merely technically, it had won in the imagination of people, and that meant the next step could finally be taken. Niagara Falls was being studied as a source of hydroelectric power, and an international consortium had opened a competition to determine which electrical system would be used to transmit that energy to the city of Buffalo. Westinghouse, carrying Tesla's technology, won the contract. There is a detail in this story that deserves to be said slowly. Niagara Falls generated an amount of energy that, at that moment, seemed immeasurable, and the plan was to transmit it more than 30 kilometers away, using alternating current to light homes, run streetcars, power factories. It was a project without precedent in the history of human engineering, and it was being built on the foundation of a motor that Tesla had conceived entirely in his own mind, on an afternoon in a park in Budapest, more than a decade earlier, while reciting Goethe from memory and sketching in the dirt with a stick. There is something deeply unsettling about that arc, the distance between the moment of conception and the moment of realization, and everything that was destroyed and rebuilt in between. What 1893 represents in Tesla's story is not a simple victory. It is a turning point that contains within it every contradiction of his life. He won the most important battle of his career and simultaneously surrendered the financial reward that victory would have generated. He astonished the entire world at a fair that drew more than 27 million visitors, and returned to a hotel room in New York where he lived in near total solitude. He proved that alternating current was the future of civilization, and no one at the time thought to ask what that future was costing him. And here lies the irony that runs through the entire story of Nikola Tesla, impossible to ignore when you look at 1893 closely. The man who contributed more than anyone to electrifying the modern world lived, at his core, in a private darkness that no lamp could reach. That is not an easy metaphor. It is a clinical observation about what happens when a mind operates at a level of abstraction that the surrounding world simply cannot keep pace with. Tesla was not a martyr. He was not a saint. He was an extraordinarily capable and deeply flawed man, navigating a historical moment that demanded everything he had, and that offered him, in return, glory without stability, recognition without belonging, and a future the entire world now inhabits, but that he himself never lived to see complete. On the final night of the Chicago Exposition, the lights went out all at once. All 200,000 lamps, simultaneously, in a single instant of total darkness that the crowd had been prepared to wait for. And then they came back on, all at once, flooding everything in white light. The crowd roared. Tesla, according to the account of a journalist who was present, was standing in a corner of the pavilion, quiet, watching. He was not smiling. He was simply watching, with the expression of someone who already knew exactly what was coming next, and who understood that what was coming next, for him, would be far harder than what had just happened. The future was lit, and he was alone inside it. And this is where I stop, for now.